So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants of the World Forestry Week. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the second high-level dialogue of this week, and today we are here to discuss forests and climate change. You heard already in the COFO opening a lot of references to the Paris Agreement and what golden opportunity that agreement provides to forests and forestry. Forest and forestry have never been as visible as they are today in an international setting. So that poses us challenges, but also opportunities. And this is what we're here to discuss today. We would also like to hear from the panel not only the challenges and opportunities, but also what might be the role of FAO in supporting countries, in facilitating countries' access to new financing, and also in supporting them in their capacity development to actually implement the commitments they have made in the Paris Agreement, and in particular the nationally determined contributions that they have submitted. So with this, it would be my pleasure to invite our moderator, Mr. Matt Frey. Here, you saw him already yesterday, and this is a reintroduction of Matt Frey. Matt is a British TV news journalist and a writer. He's currently a presenter at Channel 4. He formerly worked at BBC. He has more than 20 years' experience in international reporting all around the world, from Bosnia, Kosovo, from Hong Kong, Singapore, Near East, South Africa, Washington, you name it. But without any further delay, I'll pass the floor to yours. So over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you. Good morning again. It's wonderful to get away from the conflict zones of the world to spend some time in the diplomacy of forestry, which is really vitally important, but relatively harmless by comparison. So let me introduce the panel first of all. We have a very distinguished panel of experts with us today from a wide variety of fields and indeed countries. Thomas Tidwell from the United States. He is the Chief of the United States Forestry Service. He has spent over 35 years with the agency in a variety of positions, including District Ranger, Forest Supervisor, and Regional Forester for the Northern Region. We have Ms. Thelma Krug, Vice Chair of the IPCC from Brazil, a senior researcher at the Instituto Nacional de Pesquisas Especiais. Did I say that correctly? I don't think I did, but you're being very kind to me. So she's from the IPCC, so she's here really to kind of hold us to account about what the forestry community can do to live up to the commitments of Paris. We have Mr. René Castro Salazar, please. He is the Assistant Director General of the FAO, the head of trees. I called him yesterday, and he gave a rather memorable end to our discussion yesterday afternoon by saying that we should not preach to each other, but we should sing to the outside world. We need to become as well known as Pavarotti for the rest of the world when it comes to the challenges regarding forestry. Mr. Abderrahim Houmi, he is the Secretary General of the High Commission on Forests, Water and Desertification of the Kingdom of Morocco. We have Ms. Victoria Tauli-Corpus. She is the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous People. Victoria Tauli-Corpus is an indigenous leader from the Kankane-Igorot people of the Cordillera region in the Philippines, a social development consultant, indigenous activist, civic leader, human rights expert, public servant, and an advocate of women's rights in the Philippines. Welcome to you. Then we have from Mexico, Mr. Jorge Rascalda, the Director General of National Forestry in Mexico. And last but not least, Mr. Ulrich Apel. He's a Senior Environmental Specialist, Natural Resources Team at the GEF in Washington. The GEF, as you may remember, was set up in 1992 after the Rio Earth Summit to help tackle our planet's most pressing environmental problems. So there we go. That's a very illustrious lineup. But first of all, I'd like to call upon René to give us not a tree song, but a tree talk. So a big hand to René, please.
Good morning, everybody. If I can summarize what my proposal will be, it will be simple. More trees for a better climate. How we do that? How can we start the challenge of implementation that will be 2016? Let me share it with you. I prepare a short formal presentation. This is to make sure you are paying attention. Thank you. Okay, here we are. First of all, let me start with this. Climate change is a threat. Could be devastating. And nature does not wait for diplomats and politicians to agree. It has its own timing, and we are already suffering climate change. Scientists, and the IPCC in particular, have been telling us we have like two scenarios. If we don't do anything, that will be not only devastating, but a collapse. We will be reaching 30 gigatons and probably 5 Celsius. There will be a collapse. If we do our best, if we work hard, the IPCC is telling us, by 2100, there will be around 10 billion people in the world. And if we manage that these people will emit only 1 ton per capita, reaching 10 gigatons, closer to the absorptive capacity, and we will talk about that, we may be able to stabilize the climate change in around 2 Celsius. We need more trees for that. One of the first consequences, and I am from Central America and from the tropics, is that traditional food, and this is a story from the Economic Commission from Latin America, will be going to the north and to the south. We will become net importers of rice, beans, and corn, the traditional staple food for our region. And this is with 2 Celsius. You cannot imagine, and we don't want to wait for the collapse with other consequences. What can we do? Let me give you this example with the Latin American per capita. Remember, we need to go down to 1 ton per capita by the 2100, and we are today in 6.41 tons per capita. FAO could work in some of the areas here. For example, if we improve land use management, and then if we do better with the fertilizers and with the waste, especially the agricultural waste, we may be able to deal with around 3.2 tons per capita. It will be a big part of the challenge we are facing. How can we do that? Well, there is for the first time ever, a bottom-up approach that came from the countries in Paris. At that time, we call it INDCs, Intended National Determined Contributions. More important than that, later on, we drop the I. From intended, now we are assuming the national determined contributions. They will be ratified by the Congress, and they will be binding. So FAO should work with the governments to help them to implement their NDCs. Still, the first estimates are showing that if we implement the NDCs, that will be close to 3 Celsius between the two and the collapse. So we will eventually need to do more than that. In New York, in April, 175 countries ratified, more than ever. 101 presented agricultural options for adaptation, and 88 agricultural and forest activities and options for mitigation. Now is the time to implement. How do we do? How do we reach this 1 ton per capita? Well, there is first of all the Green Climate Fund. The Green Climate Fund is already organizing itself. It has collected pledges for a little bit more than 10 billion US, and they have in the bank around 50% of that money. And they promise that they will be delivering by the end of this year 2.5 billion. Without our help, they cannot do that. Using the old approach, the ones going project by project, especially learn at the banks, even using the approach of our good friends from the GEF, they cannot deliver with the speed that we will need and with the intensity that will require us to deliver 100 billion per year, which is the essential of the Paris Agreement, and that will be growing as we can show it could be delivered. So we have to provide the world with options to deliver quicker with a very environmental sound responsibility, and that is doable. Let me show you one example. I am from Costa Rica, and my country and Norway and Maldives and others decided to be carbon neutral. Carbon neutral means that they assume the idea of saying, no, we are not going to emit 1 ton per capita. We are going to emit 0 tons per capita. How you do that and still develop? It's a simple equation, but it's not as simple as doing it. Emissions minus reduction minus compensation should be equal to 0. Emissions is whatever we are emitting when we drive the car, when we produce our food, when we produce waste. And then reductions is the energy efficiency, is when we use less fertilizers, when we use less water. And compensation is whatever we cannot reduce, we will compensate by planting more trees, or natural afforestation, or sustainable forest management. That should be equal to 0. Is that doable? Let me show you some examples. This is the largest rice producer in Costa Rica. They decided that they will be ahead of the competitors. They are already marketing this rice in the Costa Rican supermarkets, and they are doing 2 things essentially. They are using the rice skins to produce electricity for their needs and for the neighbors. And whatever land is available in their rice fields, they are planting trees, or they are allowing the natural forest to recover. And then they protect it from illegal logging, from forest fires, and from other issues like pests and something. Next. And this is another example. This guy is also me, only a little years, before. You can storage energy at night when you have a surplus. We have a surplus of hydroelectricity during the winter and at night. And we have a deficit when everybody's cooking and in summer. So you can storage energy producing hydrogen. And then when you need it, you use the hydrogen, as now you are using natural gas or liquefy petrol gas. And that will be an interesting alternative source of energy. Or, you know, I was proud to present the first CO2 neutral coffee in Qatar. These guys, you know, the Costa Rican guys, they are happy to reduce the fertilizers, they reduce the water, they are using more the sun to have it neutralized. Of course, you know, they need to learn how to produce the macchiatos and the longos and the cappuccinos to make more money, but that will eventually happen. So far, what they are doing is to prepare to market this carbon CO2 neutral, the coffee, as the first in the world to compete with larger producers. And finally, a sectorial example. And this is what Costa Rica did in the 40s, following essentially the advice of the international financial institutions to convert forest land into agricultural land. At that time, we said cutting down mountains makes countries. We were so efficient that the forest coverage went down from 75% to 31 and even lower. As you can see the map, we call this the Costa Rican striptease. You know, lost the cover. Then we changed the policies. We provide incentive. We introduce a fossil fuel, and the natural forest started recovering. And these are the last images. And the very last one, the last year, is 54% of the national territory, mainly with natural forests and 1% with plantations. The challenge of the world now, as we will discuss in the next few days in COFO, is mainly in the dry lands and in the tropics. We could have an influence there. And there are many options, like, you know, allowing the natural forest to recover with ecotourism, to protect biodiversity, or to develop agroforestry better. For example, for coffee with shadows, and also for birds' migratory things. Why? Why us? Why using these mechanisms? So this is a World Meteorological Organization summary. As you can see, there are many sectors emitting greenhouse gases. For example, the geological reservoirs, you know, the coal, the gas, the fossil fuels, or the waste in the cities and the forest fires, and only few things available. You can see there the land sink and the ocean sink. Well, my proposal here, and with this I finish, the land sink, we can mainly use forest options in the next decades and provide a concrete example, the least cost that will restore the lands, will preserve the water, will provide good jobs and food security for the rural communities, and will recover the forests of our countries in the way the countries decide to go. It could be more a natural forest, assisted afforestation, combined with plantations, and other activities. How are we going to do it? This is our proposal. FAO should be able and willing to work with the regional banks and the Green Climate Fund So the small landholders will be part of the process, not left out or excluded in the process. And the countries should be able to work with us at their own speed, in their own preference, with their own priorities, with the NDCs. Just to give you an example, we signed recently the first agreement like this with the Central American Development Bank. And now we are going to the Green Climate Fund, and we want to invest $150 million for the small Central American countries in a revolving fund to restore and make more productive up to 7 million hectares. So for the people here from Africa, make the proportion from Central America to the bigger African territory. The people from Asia, from the small Central American to the bigger Asian territory. We need to have an impact. We can provide the world with a solution. And finish with this. If we are around 20% of the mitigation and even the least cost adaptation options based on trees and better land use, we should get at least 10 or 20% of the green climate funds per year, and being able to invest, a minimum of 10 billion per year in having more trees. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, René. Okay, now, if the technology works, and I hope it does, then we should be able to talk to Indonesia now, to Nazir Fuad. Is he there? Do we have a technology link to Jakarta? Hello, Nazir, are you out there? No? Anyone can tell me whether is the satellite up or is it down? I feel as if I'm the film Dr. Strangelove. Dimitri, can you hear me, Dimitri? No. Okay, well, I'll tell you what, this is what we're going to do.
There he is.
Ah,
Can you hear me?
there he is, yes.
Okay.
Nazir Fuad, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you very much, Matt.
Okay, it's wonderful that it's worked. Yes, it's like being in the Situation Room in the White House. Okay, so I'm going to introduce you now because I haven't done that yet. You are the head of the Peatland Restoration Agency in Indonesia, which is a very new agency. Am I right in thinking?
Correct.
Okay, so tell me about the importance of peatlands in Indonesia and why it was felt necessary to set up a restoration agency.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Apologies that I cannot be with you physically, but I'm very happy to join these discussions, the high-level dialogue from here in Jakarta in FAO office. I'd like to, of course, present what happened in Indonesia in the last 18-20 years of our forest fire management and now our efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from land use changes, including from the peatland, avoiding more peat fires and also restoring the degraded peatland. Let me start by, of course, you all are aware of how tremendous, because of the El Nino in 2015 up to 2016, the fires has been raging in Indonesia and some countries. In Indonesia alone, there have been 2 studies at least, one last year quoting that the fires in Indonesia have emitted almost 2 gigatons of carbon. Another study just recently released by many scientists, including C4, quoted about 860 million tons of carbon dioxide because of the forest fire in Indonesia. And out of those numbers, almost 900 million tons, over half were coming from peat fires. Peatland, which has been drained and then burned, and almost impossible, if not very difficult, to be extinguished. So learning from the experiences of seeing tens of millions of people of Indonesia suffocated because of the haze, in some provincial center cities. 2 months, the airport was closed down. The president, the government made a very daring initiative to no longer allow any pit land being drained and then burned for this year and following years. That is the reason why the Pit Land Restoration Agency was created by the president in early January 2016. The targets for this agency is to identify up to 2 million hectares of pit land in Indonesia and restore them, make them always wet and moist, so in the dry months, no fire can burn those pit land. Indonesia have about 15 million hectares of pit land. We are the country having the largest tropical pit land in the world. Out of the 15 million hectares of pit land, we think about half or a bit more than half are in very good shape. They are still pristine. Some of them are in protection status. Some of them may have not in protection status yet. So Indonesia direction is, of course, to have those all remaining intact pit land be protected, no longer for conversion, including those area which has been planned for cultivation is now all stopped. So this was the decision made by the government in end of 2015 when we were suffering from these fires. What about the other half? The other half, they were partly degraded, they were heavily degraded, they were moderately degraded. The instructions, the mandate of this agency is to locate the area which will be burned, repeatedly has been burned, and then will be burned again because of the canal have been dug and have been draining this pit land. Those need to be prevented. The draining has to be stopped. The canal which have been dug for draining the canal has to be closed down or at least blocked. And then the water table have to be managed in those areas. So to keep it as wet as possible, even in the driest month, like now we have still our dry month in July. And at the same time also, if possible, for some cultivation area in this dry pit land, the restoration, the water restoration is happening as well as the cultivation should also happen based on paludi culture or agricultures on pit land. So we have to find crops that will grow perfectly well on a wet pit land, providing economic livelihood for the people and for corporations who have been getting business license on those areas. So these are all the scope of the Pit Land Agency. We're targeting not only 2 million hectares the President requested. We have done analysis through satellite images and data that we gather from both government and as well as university, academics, and NGO sources, including private sector contributions. We identified up to 2.6 million hectares of pit land, which is under degraded status, degraded conditions. We developing plan on how to restore the water ecological hydrology of these 2.6 million hectares of pit land. At the same time, we identified more than half of the remaining 15 million hectares of pit land, which is under good shape and that are put under protections or under moratorium status. This is what's happening. And I can see that the long episodes of fire and the very bad El Nino last year and the bad fires happening have changed the paradigm of the government in Indonesia in just, let's say, a few weeks. Changing happening so fast in our government. Agency is created, instruction from the president of no longer pit draining can happen. Restoration have to put in place as a priority of the country. And development path has to be adjusted for this new course of pit restorations and pit moratorium. At the same time, also looking for alternative of livelihood and economics. We are grateful that the FAO have a lot of paludiculture experts, as well as other friends of Indonesia, both government of other countries, as well as our academicians and farmers, who have proved how peatland can be cultivated, but still keep the water table high and moist. So this is what we will be doing in the next 5 years. The peat agency is created by the president for the operation for 5 years until 2020.
Okay.
I think that's my 5 minutes. I hope I'm not taking too much time of the other panelists. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nazir. And I have to say, when I worked for the BBC, I covered the forest fires, the peat fires of Indonesia, and and this was at the end of the last millennium, and it was a very dramatic situation. When you went to Kuala Lumpur or Singapore, the visibility in the haze was literally reduced down to the length of your arm in some very dramatic cases. It was awful, and I'm glad to see that you're doing something about it. Thank you very much indeed. Now let's go to our panel. Now what we like to have here at the FAO is an elevator pitch. Now the elevator pitch is a 1-minute presentation, maybe 1:10, 1:15. Tom wants 1:25.
One.
And I have to say, the elevator pitch is not based on the speed of the elevators here at the FAO. Because if that was the case, you'd all get half an hour. Okay? So this is an elevator from another universe. So you each have 1 minute, roughly, to make your pitch. And I'm going to literally start here and then go around the round. So Tom,
Okay.
you have your minute.
Well, thank you. Clean air, clean water, biodiversity, food security, economic activity, quality of life for all. Those are the benefits that forests provide us. And today, these forests are facing the most historic challenges we've ever had due to climate change. At the same time, there's a greater need for us to have our forests be able to mitigate these effects and adapt to climate change. So one of the key opportunities we have with this challenge is through restoration, to restore the ecological resiliency of these forests so they can withstand the stresses of climate change and continue to provide all these benefits. Restoration, it's expensive. So we need to really stretch our scarce resources. We need to find ways to develop new markets, especially for small diameter material and the excess woody biomass that needs to be removed from these forests to be able to restore their resiliency. We also need to use partnerships to help us reforest areas, to plant trees, and find partners to help us to work through adaptation. The other key part of it is to make shifts in our institutional frameworks so that we fully recognize the changes that are occurring through climate change and be able to adapt our management of how we're managing forests. And then the last thing, we need to provide the scientific and technical information to the right people, the people that are in a position to be able to implement the changes so that we can maintain and restore our forests. Thank you.
Well done, Tom. Thelma Krug.
Yes, thank you very much. So let me first say that it's a pleasure to be in this dialogue. And let me give a different perspective, maybe. Since I am representing IPCC, I'll be strictly under the IPCC findings, especially in the last assessment report. So what I would like to say is that IPCC has, in its working group that works with mitigation, a whole chapter devoted to agriculture, forestry, and other land use. And in there, we see that emissions from AFOLU, as we call it, corresponds to about 25% of the total emissions, or the global emissions. About half and half due to agriculture, maybe a little bit more than land use today, especially deforestation, because of the enormous cut and in reduction in emissions in some countries, in particular Brazil, and also to reforestation efforts like you have in China. So what we see is, looking to a concerning point of view, where you see global emissions rising, but basically in the energy sector, industrial sector, waste, basically energy. And you see now a declining trend related to land use. So what does this mean? This means that efforts in AFOLU may be huge, as they are being. However, if we don't refrain the emissions on the energy side in other sectors, then I would say that there is very little hope that the forests will be able to save the world. René, you have said some points, and I appreciated that very much. But I say that refraining the global warming to at most 2 degrees centigrade, and now we are obviously talking about 1.5, will require a dramatic change in all sectors, in particular energy. Forests are very vulnerable. So if we don't refrain to that, sometimes people don't like to say optimistic, but it's the scenario that IPCC has of a huge mitigation effort. If we don't move to that pathway, then forests being very vulnerable, as well as agriculture, might bring a very grey hope for the future. So forests can contribute a lot. Agriculture practices can change as well and have a huge mitigation contribution. But by alone, they will not suffice. So that's my message, Matt, that I wanted to say, that things that have to be viewed in an integrated way, cross-sectoral, and in particular looking for the huge and dramatic changes in energy systems that will allow the trend in global emissions to move.
To sum it up, forests can do a lot, but they can't do it alone.
True.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you, Thelma. Now, René, you had your tree talk, so I'm going to skip because...
Of course.
Okay, I'm going to just go on to
You
the
mean
next...
I talk too much.
No, you've talked plenty, and
Yeah,
that's
thank
all
you.
very good, and we'll get back to you in the discussion.
Only let me welcome Elena Semero, our deputy. Just
Oh, yes.
arrived.
Hello. Nice to see you again, Maria Elena. Jorge Rascalda. Where are you? You're next.
Yes.
You have your minute of fame.
Merci. Tout d'abord, je remercie la FAO de me donner cette opportunité de m'exprimer sur un sujet d'une importance capitale pour toute la planète. Évidemment, on ne le dirait jamais assez. Les forêts sont très importantes pour la vie et pour l'homme, et évidemment très importantes pour le climat. Il est clair que la communauté internationale a fait des progrès. L'accord de Paris est un accord historique. Mais maintenant, cet accord ne peut avoir d'effet que si tout le monde s'y met pour le mettre en œuvre. Pour le mettre en œuvre, il faut qu'on fasse un diagnostic réaliste. Nous avons évidemment des ambitions. Ces ambitions ont pu mobiliser tous les pays. Mais pour vraiment aller à des choses concrètes, il faut qu'on arrive aussi à regarder ce qui s'est passé dans le passé et construire un peu sur les lacunes et les défaillances du passé. Par exemple, sur la question de financement, jusqu'à une date récente, nous avons eu aussi construit des ambitions par rapport au protocole de Kyoto. Il y a eu cette ambition, mais malheureusement, les forêts particulièrement n'ont pas bénéficié réellement de tout le processus qui a été construit. Et par conséquent, il ne faut pas qu'on oublie un peu quelles sont les causes, pourquoi ça n'a pas marché. Et pour ça, il faut qu'on regarde un peu de très près quelles sont les difficultés. Alors parmi les difficultés, évidemment, il y a tout d'abord les responsables du secteur. Est-ce que les responsables du secteur sont aujourd'hui capables de développer des projets bancables qui tiennent compte de la réalité du monde des finances et qui tiennent compte de la réalité sur le plan technique? Ce n'est pas toujours le cas. Évidemment, il y a des expériences réussies dans le monde. Mais ces expériences doivent maintenant aussi être élargies. Donc le message le plus important que je voulais transmettre aujourd'hui, c'est que l'ambition, c'est bien, mais il faut qu'il soit une ambition réaliste. Et pour qu'elle soit réaliste, il faut qu'on examine exactement quelles sont les lacunes, pourquoi ça n'a pas marché dans le passé, et comment on peut vraiment avancer dans l'avenir. L'implication de tout le monde, l'intersectorialité est une dimension importante. Les forestiers, les responsables des forêts ne peuvent pas travailler seuls, ils doivent travailler avec tout le monde. Merci.
Very good. Thank you, Abdelrahim. Let's move on to Vicky.
Thank you very much. Well, to take off from the point of Secretary Tidwell, who mentioned about the crisis that we are facing, I think we are at the crossroads of history where the convergence of all these different crises are things that we never could have imagined in our lifetime. We have climate change, we have global inequality and gross poverty, and we have biodiversity erosion, and of course, increasing conflicts and terrorism. I think this is the challenge that we face as we meet here today. And I would like to pick up from what Thelma has said, that the approach that needs to be done really is to do seriously intersectoral or cross-sectoral approaches and integrated approaches to landscape management. From the indigenous people's perspectives, I have visited many countries, and I know for a fact that many of the remaining tropical forests in the world today have been sustained and are still protected because of indigenous peoples who have sacrificed their lives. They live simple lives to allow for this to continue to be protected. And I think that this kind of contribution should be recognized. So in the Paris Agreement, there was a preambular paragraph 8, which says that parties in undertaking actions on climate change protect and respect human rights, including indigenous people's rights. And I think that is a very good inclusion, which has never been there in many of these legally binding agreements. And I would like to end my message by saying that it therefore stands to reason and logic that the human rights-based approach, which recognizes the security of tenure of indigenous peoples and local communities to their forests, should be adapted and seriously implemented. And the cross-sectoral and integrated approach, which brings together forest, agriculture, watershed management, and energy programs, these should all be done in a cohesive and a synergistic manner, so we will be able to achieve the goals that we have set forth for ourselves in terms of cutting back greenhouse gas emissions and ensuring food security. Thank you very much.
Vicky, thank you very much indeed. Just one question, Vicky. How much, I'm just curious about this, what percentage of forests in the Philippines are kind of managed by indigenous people, roughly?
Well, I think almost maybe 80%.
80%.
Most of the remaining forests are in indigenous people's territories. And we have maps to show the convergence of the areas where the rights of indigenous peoples are recognized with the forests.
So in the Philippines, that relationship between indigenous people and forests is absolutely essential for the future of forests there.
Totally.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Jorge Rascalde, your turn.
Sí, gracias. Gracias por esta oportunidad de poder compartir fácilmente ideas y trabajos en diferentes países. En el caso de México, un país donde son 200 millones de kilómetros cuadrados, que el 70% es forestal, donde hay compromisos muy establecidos ya por el gobierno a nivel internacional, 2030 cero deforestación, llegar al 2030 también con 20% de reducciones en nuestras emisiones. Somos un país que voluntariamente aceptó reducir emisiones sin ser un país altamente emisor, donde el 70% también es una tenencia tierra única, es de ejidal o comunal, donde son indígenas o pequeños productores dueños de este terreno. Y bueno, con estos retos y con una alta necesidad económica de las personas, donde habitan más o menos 10 millones de personas, viven en el bosque y del bosque, el reto es muy grande. ¿Cómo hacerles llegar que tengan el mínimo indispensable para poder vivir dignamente? Es a través del bosque, de una sustentabilidad. Se habla mucho de reforestación. Hoy en día plantemos un árbol, plantemos, pero habrá que tener cuidado también en la planación. No es solamente plantar. En México tenemos un programa de reforestación muy ambicioso. Es más que ambicioso, es real, 1 millón de hectáreas recuperar, pero que esta recuperación de este 1 millón de hectáreas tenga un alto porcentaje de sobrevivencia en lo que estamos reforestando. No tiene caso, yo con experiencias pasadas, estar reforestando millones y millones de árboles si estos no se van a lograr. Entonces, todos aquellos programas que se hagan en reforestación tienen que ir acompañados de un seguimiento, sobre todo en nuestros países donde la propiedad es ejidal o comunal, de un acompañamiento económico o un acompañamiento de un trabajo para estas personas que puedan vivir y a la vez poder lograr este objetivo. Yo creo que son los grandes retos. México, vuelvo a comentarlo, si bien pareciera que no son grandes cantidades, pero son retos muy claros, muy específicos. Estamos acompañados ya de una ley de cambio climático. Tenemos ya un programa nacional forestal que es mandatado por el presidente de la República, donde hay una obligación de las dependencias de ponerse en contacto directo con el sector forestal para lograr los objetivos. Esto a grandes rasgos de lo que está haciendo México y creo que vamos por muy buen camino.
Thank you, Jorge. We're all taking slightly longer elevators here. Ulrich, it's your turn.
Thank you, Matt.
Can we, your mic isn't on. Can we make sure that Ulrich's mic is on, please?
Yeah.
Just count to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just give me a count to 10. No.
That's
Something with his mic. Is it on? We need an engineer on the stage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Or you have to shout, Ulrich. There we go.
Okay, I'm using
That's
the
much
micro.
better. Thank you.
So, coming from a financial institution, my main point is that climate finance and forest finance is essential to implement the Paris Agreement and to achieve the SDGs. And we have had in recent years an upwards trajectory. But despite this positive trend, I think what is really needed is a transformation of the financial system to shift countries to a low carbon and climate resilient development path. And there are also some gaps still remaining, for example, in adaptation funding for the most vulnerable countries. Now, the GEF is committed to climate finance and forest finance. It's our core business, really. In the past 2 fiscal years, we have provided 1.4 billion, with about 36% on mitigation and 29% with adaptation as a primary objective. And with that, we have been also able to leverage about 10 billion in co-funding, including from the private sector. Now, as you know, the GEF is providing mainly grants, but we are also experimenting with some innovative financing tools, with concessional non-grant instruments, with, for example, equity investments, debt instruments, partial risk guarantees, and I think those innovative instruments are needed. It's our experience, and I think that's what we want to talk today, to what are those innovative approaches, especially in forest funding, and how can we grow and how can we scale them up.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, Tom, let me just start, give you a question here. Then we talked about money there and investments. What are you doing and what should be done to enhance investments in the forest sector, especially when you're addressing climate change?
Well, I think the first thing we need to always remind ourselves, and it was brought up here on a couple panelists, we need to have the capacity in place so that we can actually accomplish the work. There is this tremendous focus on the financial part of it, which is extremely important. But if we not have the capacity in place to be able to implement those actions and then to be able to track that and be able to monitor the benefits that are coming out of that, it's going to be difficult, I think, to be able to maintain the progress that we're going to need. So for me, that's going to be the first thing, is to have that capacity in place to be able to actually implement and make a change on the ground.
And what progress are you making in the States on that front already?
Beg your pardon?
What progress are you making in the United States on that front?
Well, the United States, we've embraced what we call this collaborative effort to be able to work with our communities, the people that live close to the forest, to be able to work with them to be able to implement these changes. One example of this is what we're doing out in Arizona, where we're treating 120,000 hectares of ponderosa pine to be able to restore the resiliency of that forest. And through this collaborative effort, we have support from not only our NGOs, the environmental community, but the local communities to be able to do this work. And the key there is to be able to develop a market. A lot of this is small diameter material that needs to be removed to thin out these forests so they're more resilient, especially to wildland fire. So that's been one of our challenges, to develop those markets so it's economically feasible to do the restoration work. But that's one example.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom. Let me ask you, Abderrahim Houmi, on a country level, So looking at Morocco specifically, what are the challenges and opportunities for forests and the forestry sector in contributing to the NDCs? And again, we're talking about this cross-sectoral approach.
Pour le cas du Maroc, tout d'abord, j'aimerais souligner une chose importante sur le plan institutionnel. Au Maroc, dès 2003, il y a eu un choix stratégique pour le secteur forestier, dans le sens où ce département est un département qui a un statut particulier et qui est rattaché directement au chef du gouvernement. Et dont le responsable, qui est le monsieur Dr Abdelhadim Hafi, qui n'a pas malheureusement eu l'occasion d'être parmi nous aujourd'hui, compte tenu de sa responsabilité en tant que commissaire de la COP22 également, donc a ce statut particulier qui a un mandat beaucoup plus important que le mandat politique, parce que le temps écologique, souvent, il transcende les autres temps. Donc, sur le plan institutionnel, ça c'est important. Sur le plan de mobilisation des forces vives du pays et aussi sur le plan financier, il y a un effort très important dans le sens d'impliquer la population locale dans la gestion des ressources forestières, mais aussi dans le sens d'une intégration sectorielle, notamment avec le secteur de l'agriculture, le secteur de l'eau et le secteur de l'environnement. Donc nous avons une ambition importante. Le Maroc a pu, durant les dernières décennies, inverser la tendance de la dégradation qui existait dans le passé. Aujourd'hui, nous sommes un pays qui a pu augmenter sa superficie forestière. Évidemment, il y a beaucoup de choses qui restent à faire. Le Maroc, bien sûr, il est honoré d'accueillir la COP22 et nous voyons que c'est une opportunité pour le pays aussi de s'investir dans ce secteur pour répondre justement aux objectifs de l'accord de Paris. Évidemment, beaucoup de choses restent à faire. Quand on parle de l'intégration sectorielle, il ne faut pas qu'on oublie tout d'abord qu'il faut réfléchir à une intégration entre les 3 conventions de Rio. Nous parlons donc du changement climatique, mais aussi il y a la Convention sur la lutte contre la désertification et la biodiversité, puisque le secteur forestier se retrouve justement au milieu de toutes ces questions. Donc il est important que nous travaillions de façon harmonisée avec ces 3 conventions. Il est aussi important, quand on parle un peu des projets forestiers sur le plan financier, aujourd'hui, on a tendance à croire qu'on peut monter des projets forestiers en se basant sur la superficie forestière et la quantité de carbone séquestré. Je crois que là, c'est une réduction un peu très dramatique de ce qui est la forêt. Souvent, on a travaillé avec des projets beaucoup plus intégrés qui visent surtout à agir sur les leviers de développement du secteur. Si on va simplifier la forêt à la quantité de carbone et à la superficie, je crois que là, nous affrontons un vrai danger. Donc il ne faut pas qu'on oublie que aussi la forêt, c'est avant tout un écosystème où l'homme il est à l'intérieur. Il faut qu'on l'intègre. Donc la dimension socio-économique dans les forêts, elle est fondamentale. Voilà, je m'arrête à ce niveau-là pour laisser la parole.
All right, thank you very much. Vicky, a question for you. You talked earlier about the relationship between indigenous people and the forest. So tell me about how it works on the ground, in practical terms. Give me a practical example of how cross-sectoral approaches work.
Well, first of all, indigenous people's worldviews and practices are very much related to the land. I mean, indigenous peoples are there because of their relationship to the land. And they have a very intricate relationship with the land. It's not as if they relate with the forest and the agricultural lands. They relate with all the various areas.
It's a holistic approach.
It's a holistic approach. So, and I know this because I live in a region which has tropical forests. And we have governance systems, which are very indigenous governance systems, which it require everybody to really have a role to play in maintaining the forest and ensuring that forest fires are decreased, and also, of course, ensuring that the diversity of of trees that are in the forest are maintained as well, because we believe that this is something that should prosper, that should be allowed to happen. And so we protest against monoculture plantations, expansion of monoculture plantations in some of the most important forests that we regard as crucial for our survival and our identities as indigenous peoples. So that's that's one of the things. The second thing is, of course, the institutional and governance issues. We try to engage with the government to accept that these institutional practices, these traditional governance systems and ecosystems management practices that we do should be recognized and supported instead of being considered illegal or actually undermined substantially. So I think those are the concrete things that we do. And we relate with the various agencies, not just with the forestry, but also with the mining division, also with the agriculture, as well as the ones who are developing energy projects.
And is there a genuine dialogue in the Philippines between all these different sectors, between the central government, the various industries, big agriculture, and the indigenous communities? Do they ever sit around the table together?
Not to our satisfaction.
Right.
You know, now, I don't know, with our new government, we are trying, and but he is, when, you know, human rights, of course, has to be in the center of all this, and this is the message that I am bringing strongly to him, that you cannot do all these things without really putting human rights, respecting human rights of indigenous peoples in the center, which means respecting their rights to their lands and territories, the traditional knowledge that they have over protecting forests, as well as the ecosystem practices that have been proven to be successful through generations.
I think there's a theme, isn't there, here, that you have the best laid plans and long-term strategy that evolves over time, dialogue between agencies, and then a new government comes in and suddenly things are changed.
Exactly.
Sometimes dramatically, sometimes
and
less
we have to sustain that kind of dialogue because we stay in our territories and there's no other choice for us.
We're not going to talk about Brazilian politics, Selma, because because we haven't got that much time. No elevator is long enough to have that conversation. But I do want to ask you, as the high priestess of the IPCC on this panel, this is my question. Following the Paris Agreement and the new opportunities for the forestry cross-sectoral roles in developing NDCs, what do you see? What do you see as the future of forest monitoring?
Well, without forest monitoring, it's going to be quite hard. Let me explain why. We are talking before on mobilizing financing. And when we talk about mobilizing financing, if I may, Matt, divert a little bit, you need to rely on creative ways, not only fundings like the Green Climate Fund, but you may also have bilateral cooperation, trilateral cooperation. Stimulating the private sector is a little bit complicated because the private sector businesses rely on less risk. And forestry may have a high-risk investment because it's recognized that you may have the reversal of the carbon stocks, you may have leakage. So businesses and private sector is a little bit careful when addressing financing. The other issue is also in terms of the slow rate of investment. For instance, when we do reforestation large scale, the investment is huge. Huge. Not necessarily successfully implemented, despite all the efforts in management. And there is a very slow rate of return.
So are you saying there's a lot of wasted money, basically?
No, not wasted money. I would say that the money that you put there, waiting for the return of the money that you invested, may take several years.
Just takes time, yeah.
In developing countries, you may have a quicker rate, but you may need to wait for 6-7 years. So I think that I would also like to say about the new financing instruments, like, for instance, REDD+, which is results-based payments for reducing emissions from deforestation, from degradation, from conservation, which is a new mode. It's a mode that gives countries that are donor countries the credibility that you have already done the reduction. So they are paying for something that has been verified on the grounds. Now, coming to your question, to give this credibility to the results, you need strong monitoring tools and verification tools. So that's the challenge.
And how are we doing on that front?
Well, we are getting better because you can rely on remotely sensed data, and remotely sensed data have become more available, much more than you had in the past. So I must make reference to, for instance, the Brazilian experience, because that's in the IPCC as well, using remotely sensed data to build a consistent, transparent, reliable, and as accurate as possible time series on deforestation. So transparency and consistency, in my view, are two elements that need to be ensured to give the donor the credibility, or the funding agency or the private sector the credibility of your results. In the past, it used to cost a lot of money because remotely sensed data were not free of charge. Today, you see a lot of free data available, and I see a very strong role of the FAO in terms of capacity building in the use of this new data. So monitoring has a key role under the MRV that has been agreed under the Climate Change Convention, and so it's again a key role.
Let me ask something, building on that. I think that you are totally right. Transparency will be critical. Let me put it in a dimension. I mentioned 10 billion a year for the forest sector. 10 billion a year. I mean, can this group that is here invest 10 billion a year in the forest sector? That may be, to put it in a physical way, 50 million hectares a year. Can we all do that? Restore, plant, sustainable management. Can we all do that? This is a challenge. I mean, this is the scale we are talking about. You know, because sometimes it's easy to say, you know, to restore 150 million hectares in Africa, and in the Sahel, another 100. I mean, can we seriously, this group that is here, because there is nobody else, can we invest 10 billion a year over the next 10, 15 years?
I don't see anyone reaching for their wallet, by the way.
Or raising the hand.
Oh, raising the hand.
But I mean, this is the task we are talking.
But Ulrich could help us.
Yeah, only what we can do, trying to catalyze this. But if you look into the whole group with all the countries here, I think that's certainly possible. I would like to echo Hosni's point with these integrated approaches, so that we not talk about only forestry, but I think, for example, we had the discussion on SDGs yesterday. They provide a really very good entry point, because investments towards the SDGs will also benefit forests. Forests are mentioned only in 2 of the SDGs, but we all know for food security, for poverty, for health, forests are really instrumental as well. And so when we talk about this forest funding, then we also have to talk about how can we find the synergies between investments in biodiversity, in climate change, in land degradation. And let me just give you one example of one of our projects in Brazil. The ARPA project is actually, it's a biodiversity project, protected areas, but it's the project that has generated a huge carbon benefits in avoided emissions, and in also benefits for forests, where really those synergies can be achieved.
Okay. Jorge Rascaldo, I want to ask you, I'm not going to ask you for 10 billion euros or dollars, don't worry. But what is Mexico doing in order to further mobilize financial resources, in order to scale up to the challenges posed by Paris?
En México tenemos el presupuesto más alto últimamente para el sector forestal en la historia. Traemos el reto del 1.000.000 de hectáreas, pero sabemos de 1.000.000 de hectáreas reforestadas. el dinero nunca alcanza, hay que buscar, hay que imaginar cómo encontrar algún financiamiento. Regularmente los financiamientos a través de un presupuesto es muy difícil, porque las políticas, más bien los políticos cambian en México cada 6 años y puede o no haber una continuidad. Es muy importante. El financiamiento para los bosques tiene que ser a través de otro recurso. Un caso exitoso de un estado en el país de México, el Estado de México se llama, un State of Mexico, donde los contribuyentes, quienes pagan el agua, el uso del agua, un porcentaje de este recurso se va a pagar servicios ambientales. Eso ha dado un gran éxito y puede ser un ejemplo para otros países. Se tiene que buscar un financiamiento alterno, no solamente el presupuesto. Y para aquellos países que contribuyen o los organismos que contribuyen con algún recurso, tienen que buscar la forma que este recurso caiga directamente a la gente necesitada, a los dueños o poseedores. Regularmente queda entrampado en organismos y es un embudo. Podemos hablar de miles de millones y quedan en cientos de pesos. Y yo creo que eso hay que tener mucho cuidado.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Now, because we've all taken a bit longer, we're going to race ahead to our second tree talk, Professor Valentini. Please welcome him to the stage. A big hand for Professor Valentini. And then hopefully after that tree talk, we have a little bit of time to do some questions from the audience.
Well, good morning. And I would like to start from one very simple question. How many trees there are in our earth? That seems quite stupid question because we look at the land, we see the forest as a piece of land with something green on top. But how many trees are really in the world? Well, yes, scientists have counted so many trees we have, and we have 400 billion trees. This is thanks to remote sensing technologies. That's fantastic because these are living organisms. It's like us. They're individuals that contribute to our lives. And we have a responsibility for these trees. We have about 61 trees per person to take care of. So it's a small family we have to look at. We have to nurture, we have to protect. We have also to use them for our lives. And of course, trees are also offering us many important functions. Biodiversity, you see this beautiful butterfly, and many other things like woods, water, air quality, carbon sequestration, of course. But of course, they are also part of our human history. This is the CO2 concentration patterns in the world and measured by satellites. And you see the red blobs that are moving during the time. I don't know if you can push the button to see the animation, but anyway, you see in the world that there are many areas with the strong red that is not connected with the industrial or energy emissions, for example, in Africa, in the forest area, in Congo River Basin, or Indonesia. So these are also the effects of deforestation. So although we recognize the importance of trees in our world, we still have deforestation takes place, and this is creating quite additional burden to our climate system. Yes, next. Yes. Okay, it looks technology is working now. We know quite a lot as a scientist, and we, for example, we have been able to, let's say, to close the carbon budget, the global carbon budget. You see from these numbers, on the left side, the emissions from fossil fuels, about 33 gigatons for carbon dioxide every year, and deforestation as well, contributing to about 9% of the total emissions. But on the right side, it's very interesting that to see in atmosphere, only 44% of our emissions are really entering. The rest, about 56%, is taken up by two important natural systems. Forests, of course, 30%, and oceans, 26%. So forests are playing a fundamental role today because we are emitting more carbon in the atmosphere, we are increasing carbon dioxide concentration, but it will be even worse without forests. You will have about a double of CO2 concentration without forests and oceans. So this is an important value for us. And next slide, you see that we try also to evaluate this important function of forest. This is, for example, looking at what is called social cost of carbon. What is it? I mean, imagine if you have climate change occurring in the planet, and you have a lot of disasters, impacts on economic sectors, and some economists recently have started to understand how much this will be, this cost, the damages of climate change. And we call this a social cost of carbon. So per tons of carbon, how much this will cost for us in the future. And if you take the forest carbon sequestration functions, you can estimate that globally and per year, we have something in the order of $470 billion. It's roughly the same amount of the economic GDP of forest sector. So we double the value of forest just by the carbon sequestration functions. Of course, deforestation is going to reduce these potentials of carbon, and as been said before, we now have good track, especially by scientists, and Brazil is an example of a really very powerful way to detect deforestation trends. And we have been quite lucky in the last 10 years or so that deforestation has been reduced. Thanks to governments, thanks to you guys, thanks to the NGOs, thanks to the civil society, thanks to FAO agencies. Everybody has put a little thing in this big challenge of reducing deforestation. However, the last 2 years, these are very recent numbers, things are going a little bit up. So the situation is not safe. So we are not safe the forest. We have not really reached what we want to reach to stabilize carbon emission due to deforestation. So there is some more work to do in that. And this is why, of course, we have to believe in what has been created in the last almost 20 years. The RED Plus has important mechanisms. Everybody of us, I see here many people, good friends, have been working hard to have this instrument in place. So we have to really reinforce that, we have to believe in that, but we have to also implement in real practices. So that's one thing, but the other thing that also scares a little bit us is how much stable will the carbon in the forest in the future. How much this function will be protected for a century or so. That is the time we need really to save our humankind. And climate change is occurring everywhere. 2015 was the warmest year since 1880. So it's really every year, basically since 2000, is becoming a world record for global warming. And you see this global warming is spreading all over the world, of course, mostly in some areas like in the boreals or the tropics, has an important impact on our forest lives. Next. And what we are scared, and we are scientists, we are discovering this new emergent problem. And I want to really push on that, because it's an emerging problem of mortalities that we see in individual trees everywhere now in the world. It's like a kind of general virus that spread all over the world that is related to climate change. So there are strong belief that there are drought, heat-induced stresses, and still is very unknown in terms of the mechanism, the processes, the biological mechanisms involved. So it's something that is going on. There are many places you see in the world where these are areas where there's been detected mortalities, unusual mortalities. So you have also to look at that. So adaptation to climate change is also another important keyword for our future. Not only mitigation, not only the function that the forests are serving in reducing global warming, but also have to protect forests from global warming itself. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. Excellent. Can I just ask you one question, Professor Valentini? I'm just curious, is tree mortality now, compared to deforestation, how big is that a problem in terms of reducing tree cover?
Well, this is not yet exactly quantified, because this is really recent trends, recent numbers. Right. But there are many areas, for example, that 20%, 30% of forest has been hit by mortality.
That's a lot. Okay.
Yeah.
Professor Valentini, thank you very much. We have 5 minutes left, so there's a lucky person out there who gets to ask a question to someone in the panel. No statements, please. I want a question. Anyone interested? Do we have any takers? No questions at all. Okay, so Renee, I'm going to ask you a question. We're, after all, sitting in the seat of the FAO. We're in the center of imperial Rome, the center of
together with
the center of power and the nerve center of the tree world. And you are the head of trees at the FAO. So you're the guy. So my question to you is, what can you promise to this community out here, who, by the way, have not just given us 10 billion euros, but what can you promise to them that the FAO can do in order to facilitate this enormously complex process?
Well, we can do two things. One is ask you all to organize, go back to your governments, and tell them that your delegation going to COP22 should make sure that there is money, more money coming to the forest sector from the Green Climate Fund. And be part of that delegation. And because now is the year for implementation. So let's go and implement. And the second thing is that FAO could provide a facility, you know, to pull together the monitoring, the effort for the landlords, the small ones, to make sure that the mechanisms are well understood, and to support countries in applying for the NDCs. But without the support of these people here, telling your country delegations, we are ready, it's not only that we are willing, because we are all willing, is that we are able to invest this amount of money per year. And let me finish with this. You asked for the pests and the problem. And Jorge just told us that Mexico, which is a big country, will be planting 1 million hectares in the next 5 years. Okay.
2018.
Honduras, a small country in our region, as we speak, is losing about 1 million hectares of pine trees because there is a pest. You know, a small pest coming from Asia. And this is being exacerbated because the change in the climate. So we will need to act, and to act now. And so the point is, we will need to act together. It shouldn't be a FAO, lonely action or lone action.
But you're there to crack the whip and remind people.
Absolutely.
Okay, crack on. Okay, I think we've reached the end. So a big hand to our panel. Ulrich, Jorge, Vicky, Abderrahim, Renee, Thelma and Tom. Matt. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.